In those childhood days, the shadows seemed thicker, more tangible, as if they were sneaking through the cracks in the doors and windows. Fear became a constant companion in the dark hours. Myke remembers the night when, after a small incident, he found himself at his neighbor's door. He didn't know what to expect, but something about that house had a strange charm that drew him in. It was an unexpected help. The man seemed to be a friendly figure, willing to offer support when despair took over. But at that moment, it didn't seem like the simple act of asking for help would bring with it the silent terror that would soon follow. The door creaked open, and the sight of the man, with his calm gaze and soft words, soon dispelled any insecurity. The conversation was easy, as if he were just performing a kindness. But there was something in his eyes, something hidden in the shadows. He offered more than the expected help, a momentary refuge, a fleeting tranquility. The feeling of safety was a relief, but it didn't take long before doubt began to infiltrate, like a mist, into his thoughts. Something didn't seem right, but fear, that subtle fear we all carry deep within our souls, prevented any more logical reaction. In the following days, Myke tried to return the kindness. It was simple, a visit, a thank you. But when he arrived at the apartment, what he found was even more terrifying. The door was closed, with no response, and the silence that surrounded the building seemed denser than ever. There was no sign of the man. Something in the air, maybe the shadows cast by distant light, suggested that he had never existed. The doubt grew more agonizing, as if fear had taken shape in every corner of that mystery. What followed? Had he encountered a spirit, or had fear distorted his perception? The questions lingered, like echoes in the walls of his heart. When he approached the building, something in the air seemed denser, as if the shadows had grown during the night. He breathed deeply, trying to shake off what seemed like a premonition. But as he walked down the hallway, discomfort took over. He touched the apartment door with an almost automatic gesture, but the sound of his touch seemed to echo louder than it should. What had once been a friendly feeling of a simple favor now transformed into an unease that threatened to engulf everything around him. He waited, but the silence that followed was a kind of response. There was no one there. Nothing except the feeling of being watched. As he searched for more answers, the sense of disconnection only grew. The building was strangely empty, as if isolated from the rest of the world. He went up to the apartment again, convinced that something could still be explained. However, when he looked for the man's name, something that should have been simple turned out to be more complex. No residents were listed, no information in the files. The feeling of emptiness took over, with fear creeping into every corner of the cold, lifeless room. The silent terror of not knowing what was real and what was just a creation of the mind seemed to grow with every step. The idea that the man had never existed seemed unsustainable, but his absence in some way was even more terrifying. It was as if reality were slowly crumbling around him. Every attempt to understand what had happened, to reconstruct that moment, only widened the abyss of uncertainty. The shadows in the apartment didn't move, but there was something strange about them, as if fear were feeding off them. What had happened that night? What had passed through his mind? Or was he the only one capable of seeing beyond the veil of reality? The terror and the shadows, now immeasurable, continued to haunt his soul, with the promise of more questions but no answers. Something lingered between the lines, waiting. Even after days of trying to understand what had happened, Myke still felt a constant presence, a sensation that he was being watched. The shadows had become denser, more threatening, as if they carried secrets he would never be able to decipher. As time passed, doubt transformed into an obsession. He revisited every detail of that encounter, but everything seemed to disintegrate before him. The man's gaze, his kind and welcoming words, now seemed to carry a duality, something hidden between the lines. The fear grew silently, as if a distant shadow were always lurking. The city, with its familiar sounds, seemed to have transformed into a distorted backdrop. Myke walked through places that once seemed harmless, but now everything felt more macabre, as if something, perhaps that man, had somehow infiltrated his reality. The sensation that something was around every corner, a whisper in the shadows, was unbeatable. Maybe he was starting to see things that weren't real, but fear left no room for reason. How can something so tangible, so real in his memory, be denied by reality itself? Doubt and terror intertwined in an uncontrollable way. And so, his life went on, always with that uncomfortable emptiness, a feeling that the man and his encounter were behind something bigger, perhaps a plot that fate had prepared for him. And although life went on, a part of him never stopped questioning what had happened that night. The absence of answers only fueled insecurity and fear. The shadows, those that seemed to hide something he would never understand, still hovered over his soul, as a promise that at some point he would cross paths with them once more. What he never knew was that the mystery hadn't ended. It was simply waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. What would happen if fear truly were an entity, a presence that crosses time and space? Myke, over the years, lived with the sense that that visit to the mysterious neighbor had not been just a casual encounter, but a silent pact. He felt that something had been left behind, an invisible mark but impossible to erase. The man who never existed? Or did he exist in a way Myke never understood? And the question that still haunts him, the shadows that followed him, the whispers that slinked between the deserted streets, were they just a product of his mind? Or a distorted reality designed to confuse him? And if, one day while walking down any street, he encountered that man again, somewhere unexpected, as if nothing had changed? What would he do? The terror, which had until then hidden in the shadows, might finally come to light, revealing the most horrifying truth of all. Fear never disappears, it just adapts, hides where we least expect it. The question remains, have you ever crossed paths with something you never should have encountered? And if the shadows, those silent and threatening companions, really knew more than you can imagine? If you enjoyed this story and want more stories like it, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. Who knows what is still lurking, waiting to be revealed?